Welcome back to Rooted and Reasoned, where faith meets thoughtful inquiry. And welcome back to our series on whether God exists.
Yeah, we've been kind of looking at different arguments and perspectives.
And this time we're going with something maybe a little bit weird at first.
Yeah.
I'm asking, could God be like a pizza?
Okay, so before anyone thinks we've totally,
Lost it?
lost our minds, right? We're not saying that God is literally, dough and cheese.
Right.
It's more a way to think about this really famous argument for God's existence.
Okay.
It's called the ontological argument.
All right, I got to admit, I'm intrigued. But how does pizza relate to proving that God exists?
Okay, so it all starts with this monk, Anselm of Canterbury.
Okay.
Way back in the 11th century, so we're talking like 1078.
Wow, okay.
He came up with this idea that if we can even imagine like a being greater than anything else, of a being that we call God, then that being must exist.
Hold on. So just by thinking about God, we're somehow proving he's real.
It's a pretty wild concept.
Pretty out there.
Yeah. And Anselm's argument is all based on logic.
Okay.
He says if God is like the greatest being imaginable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And existence is greater than non-existence, then a God who doesn't exist wouldn't actually be the greatest.
Okay.
He would be less great than a God who does exist.
Okay. I think I get that. I think I'm following so far.
Right.
But how do we define the greatest being imaginable? Like that seems pretty subjective,
I
right?
think that is a great point. And that's where Anselm gets specific.
Okay.
He uses the term maximally great being to describe God.
Okay.
This means that God has all the best possible qualities, like being all-powerful, all-knowing, perfectly good, to the absolute max.
So it's not just like pretty good. It's like the ultimate good, the source.
Exactly, the ultimate source of goodness itself.
Okay.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. So Anselm argues that this maximally great being can't just exist in our minds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or in some like imaginary world.
Right.
For God to be truly maximally great, he has to exist in all possible worlds.
Okay, now you're losing me.
Okay.
All possible worlds. What does that even mean?
All right, think of it like this. Imagine all the different ways things could be, right?
Okay.
So there could be a world where dinosaurs never died out.
Okay, I like that one.
Or like pizza for breakfast every day.
Every day.
Or even a world where gravity works in reverse.
Okay, now that one's a little trippy.
Right.
But why does God have to exist in all these different possibilities?
Okay, so because if God only existed in some worlds and not others, then that would mean there's something limiting him.
I see.
Like something preventing him from being everywhere. And that wouldn't really fit the definition of a maximally great being.
I guess not, no.
Right.
Yeah, if he's all-powerful, if he's everywhere.
He wouldn't be bound by, like, any particular world.
Right, okay, so our world is just one of those possible worlds.
Uh-huh.
So Anselm's saying God must exist here, too.
Exactly.
Okay, so let me see if I got this straight.
Okay.
Anselm is saying, if we can imagine this maximally great being, and that being has to exist in all possible worlds to actually be maximally great, then God exists in our world as well.
You got it.
Did I get it?
You got it.
Okay, but now I'm thinking, okay, if just imagining something makes it real, couldn't I prove anything exists?
Like a maximally great pizza.
Like a maximally great pizza, exactly. Perfect pizza in every possible world. I mean, sign me up.
Okay, but here's where the pizza analogy kind of falls apart.
Okay.
What even makes a pizza maximally great?
I mean, come on. Some people like thin crust. Some people like thick crust. Some people like pineapple.
Exactly. There is no, like, objective standard.
There's no standard.
For pizza perfection.
That's true. Everybody's got their own thing.
Plus, imagine a pizza existing in every possible world.
Okay.
Would it even be edible?
It would be everywhere. It would be...
Probably not.
Probably not even pizza anymore.
It wouldn't be a pizza anymore.
Yeah, okay.
So trying to apply this logic to a pizza just doesn't work.
Right.
So what's the takeaway here? The idea of a maximally great being is just fundamentally different than a maximally great pizza. So God, as Anselm describes him, has these qualities that are inherently perfect, right? And they don't depend on, like, personal preference.
Yeah, it's not,
The pizza is a pizza.
It's not subjective.
Doesn't have that same kind of, like, inherent greatness that we're talking about with God.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But this whole ontological argument thing, this is still pretty abstract, right?
Yeah.
Is this just one guy's idea from, 1,000 years ago?
It might seem abstract, but it actually connects to some really familiar ideas in the Bible.
Really? I'm surprised how so.
Okay, so for example, Psalm 145, verse 3 says, "Great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. His greatness no one can fathom." That kind of highlights God's immeasurable greatness.
Right.
Which aligns with this whole idea of a maximally great being.
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty clear connection. What other verses support this?
So Isaiah 46, verses 9 and 10.
Okay.
It says, "I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times what is still to come."
Okay.
And that emphasizes God's uniqueness
Right.
and his ultimate power,
Right.
which, again, goes hand in hand with the idea of maximal greatness.
So even though, like, the Bible doesn't explicitly lay out this argument,
Right.
it does point to some of those same, like, core concepts about God's nature.
Absolutely. And we see this throughout Scripture.
Yeah.
For instance, Exodus chapter 3, verse 14 describes God saying, I am.
Okay, yep.
Which points to his self-existent and necessary nature, right?
Okay.
And then in Revelation chapter 1, verse 8, God calls himself the Alpha and the Omega, emphasizing his eternal and unchanging existence.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot of, like, scriptural support for this idea that God isn't just, like, a being, but the being, like the ultimate being, the necessary being.
That's right. Those are just a few examples.
Okay.
There are many more verses that talk about God's omnipotence, omniscience, and moral perfection, which Anselm believed were like essential to a maximally great being.
This is fascinating. It's a lot to think about.
Those verses can add another layer, I think, to our understanding of this argument.
Okay.
So, for example, the idea that God is self-existent, which is stated in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14,
right,
meaning that he doesn't depend on anything else for his being, aligns with this concept of a maximally great being who exists necessarily, not contingently.
So while the Bible doesn't, like, spell out the ontological argument word for word,
right,
it does give us, like, a framework.
It does.
For understanding God's attributes.
Right.
In a way that kind of lines up with Anselm's ideas.
That's a great way to put it. And that's the beauty, I think, of exploring these topics from both a philosophical perspective and a theological perspective, you know?
Right.
We can gain new insights and just appreciate the richness of these ideas in ways that we might not have considered before.
You know, one thing that struck me as we were talking about this is how it highlights the difference between just believing in God and understanding who God is.
That's an interesting point. How so?
Well, Anselm's argument isn't just about, like, proving that some higher power exists.
Right.
Right. Yeah. It's about defining God as this greatest conceivable being.
Yes.
Like the ultimate source of all perfection and goodness.
Right. So it's not just acknowledging, like, okay, God's out there. It's about recognizing his supreme nature, his absolute greatness.
Exactly. And that recognition, I think, can have a really big impact on our lives. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it shapes how we view ourselves, the world around us, our relationship with God.
I totally agree.
You know, if we really grasp this concept of a maximally great being, it changes everything.
It does.
It elevates our understanding of God's power, his wisdom, his love.
Exactly. And that understanding can lead to awe, to reverence,
right, to
a much deeper sense of purpose.
Yeah, it's like we're moving from a basic belief in God to like a much more profound appreciation of his infinite nature.
That's a great way to put it. And that deeper appreciation can really lead to a more mature and more fulfilling faith.
It's like, you know, it's like the difference between seeing a beautiful painting from far away and then stepping closer to examine the details. You know? The brush strokes, the artist's skill.
Right.
It's like a whole new level.
It is.
Of understanding and appreciation.
That's a beautiful analogy. And just like with art, you know, our understanding of God can continue to grow and deepen as we explore those different perspectives and engage in that thoughtful reflection.
So even if we don't have all the answers.
Right.
That journey of seeking truth,
of
seeking understanding, that's what really matters.
I couldn't agree more. And who knows, maybe along the way we'll discover new insights. and new perspective that we never even anticipated.
That's the beauty of faith and reason, isn't it?
It is.
It's a lifelong adventure.
Yeah.
Of discovery and growth.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on, you know. We've covered a lot today, exploring Anselm's ontological argument.
Yeah.
And its implications for understanding God.
It's been a really thought-provoking conversation.
Yeah.
And we want to thank all of our listeners for joining us on this deep dive.
Absolutely.
Into faith and reason.
And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like and subscribe to Rooted and Reasoned.
Yeah, we'd love to have you join our community of curious minds and seekers of truth.
You got it.
Until next time.
Yes.
Keep exploring, keep questioning.
Yeah.
And keep the conversation going.
Absolutely.